Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Utility Sports. And today we're talking Bojan Bogdanovic, the forward for the Detroit Pistons, who is having a career year after being traded from the Utah Jazz over to Detroit during training camp. And it was actually a crazy turn of events. Everyone was anticipating a Bojan Bogdanovic trade. Well, we might get two of them in 1 year because he's kind of showcasing himself right now for a Detroit Pistons team that, well, isn't winning a ton of games, but they're packing a little bit more of a punch than I think a lot of people are expecting. If you get my pun here, of course, Killian Hayes knocking out Mo Wagner in classic fashion. But Bojan Bogdanovic is a name that I think is going to be really hot during the trade deadline. A lot of people are going to have their eyes on him, and a lot of teams and executives are going to closely monitor what he could bring at the NBA level. For their team. Obviously right now he's scoring a ton. He's kind of getting the Jeremy Grant treatment out in Detroit in terms of the numbers he's putting up. Over 20 points a game. He's actually posting a career high, and he's shooting the ball really well as well. Let's go ahead and take a look at his numbers this year in comparison to his other numbers. Through 36 games this year, he's playing 31.2 minutes. It's about on par with what you'd expect for him. And you see, again, career high there, 20.7 points, and he's doing it significantly more efficiently than he did his first year in Utah, where in Utah, they have that blender where they get inside, drive and kick. Well, he's playing even better this year for the Detroit Pistons. Now, I don't think he's as complete of a player as a lot of people would like to say, as indicated by some of these 0.1 and 0.0 blocks. He doesn't really impact the game that way. And as a forward, you'd expect to at least maybe net 1 or 2 blocks a year. Sometimes Bojan does not give you that, but he is shooting the ball really well this year, over 40% from three, pretty good volume as well. You can't score 20 points a game without good volume. So those percentages are legit this season. Some of the best years of his career in terms of efficiency and the way he's been able to fill up the basket. So Bojan Bogdanovic, I think, is a really good player to focus on here in this video as we break up some of the trade guides that we've talked about in other videos, looking at other teams. We already do have one of the Detroit Pistons. I did talk at length about Bojan Bogdanovic in there, but I thought 6 specific trades are going to be very, very helpful to look at what this Bojan Bogdanovic, deal could look like. And I have 6 different trades here. Jumping into our first trade now, and just a little disclaimer here, all of these trades are going to say failed. The website I'm using is usually pretty good about this, but they actually have this incorrect on their site. Bojan Bogdanovic is actually going to be trade eligible again this season. I know it says failed right now. You're just going to have to ignore that. You have to trust me here. The sources, trust me, bro. Bojan Bogdanovic is trade eligible this season. And in my trade guide for the Pistons, I talked about him getting moved. This, again, is the least likely offer out of the 6, in my opinion. And Pistons fans are going to be saying, whoa, only 3 second-round picks. That's not necessarily what we want here in this deal. We don't want 3 second-round picks for Bojan Bogdanovic. We want a first-rounder for him. And I understand that. The Clippers here, however, have 1 tradable first, and I don't think they would include it in a deal for Bojan. So this is kind of what the offer they would have going toward Troy Weaver. And 3 second-round picks is not something to scoff at. Honestly, those deals that Troy Weaver likes to make, he's been very aggressive in his tenure as a decision maker for the Detroit Pistons. He likes to make moves, and having 3 additional second rounders in your arsenal, he already has a good amount of them to begin with. 3 more of them lets you kind of throw some stuff around and make some moves that you want to make. So, I know a lot of people are going to laugh at that. Second round picks are important. The Clippers typically do a really good job with second round picks themselves. So they're assets that they actually view fairly highly. And I think for Detroit as well, you look at some of the guys they've been able to add in the second round themselves. I think one guy that really jumps to mind is Isaiah Livers from Michigan. There's guys every year that slide into the second round. For example, Desmond Bane was pick number 30. He was the last pick of the first round. It's very possible that good players fall to you with those picks. So even if they were to keep them, it's possible they could add 1 or 2 rotation players with those 3 picks. But it also helps them make other moves. Marcus Morris here, not a big positive for that team. They could potentially look to move him to a 3rd team, looking to add a little bit more wing size, or they could let him kind of play out the rest of the year, kind of do what he did with the New York Knicks back in the day, where he kind of built up his value for the Knicks even though they were losing, and then they traded him for a first-round pick. Maybe the Pistons could go ahead and swap Marcus Morris for maybe a couple second-rounders as well, and you're potentially looking at yourself netting 5 maybe second-round picks for Bojan Bogdanovic, essentially. And for the Clippers here, they're a team that I think is in line to make some moves. They have over a $9 million trade exception from trading Serge Ibaka last season. That will definitely come into play here, as they would like to add a player around that $9 million mark for sure. I would be shocked if they don't. It expires in February on the day of the trade deadline, so they will for sure make at least one move. And I think they are in store here to make maybe another one for a guy like Bojan Bogdanovic or another quality forward like that. I think Bojan would be a really good fit into their roster. Somebody who, he has some bad blood maybe with Kawhi Leonard after a little bit of a postseason mishap between those two guys that ended up shelving Kawhi Leonard for a little bit over a year. But, Bojan Bogdanovic is a good player, and they're professionals. I don't think that Kawhi holds anything against him. Bojan was just trying to make a play defensively in transition, and I think Kawhi just, landed a little awkwardly on his knee. So ultimately, I don't think that there's any bad blood actually between the two of them. And this would significantly upgrade the Clippers for this season. They've been rolling already. An upgrade like this could actually really put them over the top, especially when they're healthy. Bojan Bogdanovic, a really nice player, and somebody who I think more consistent of a shooter, which is really what I think the Los Angeles Clippers need. A little bit more reliability from the forward spot in terms of shooting around Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and Bojan would give that to them. But again, I think this is the least likely deal. So let's get into the next one here. The last one in this video is going to be a really fun one, so make sure to stick around for that. And I think I'm really excited for that one because no one would have seen it coming at the start of the year. But here, the Detroit Pistons and Cavaliers get on the phone. And Pistons fans probably going to be a little underwhelmed with this one as well. Again, this is the second least likely one in my estimation based on what I think Cleveland would like to offer. Let's look at it from the Cavs perspective first here. They're legit. The Cavaliers are really, really good. They're right at the top of the NBA in terms of net rating, which is one of the most important indicators in terms of how good a team is. It's basically how many points per 100 possessions are you outscoring your opponent. And being near the top gives you a lot of confidence that, hey, not only are we beating teams, but at times we're blowing teams out. And the Cavaliers, even though they're young, they're good. And making a move here for Bojan Bogdanovic under contract does not mortgage anything long-term for you. And in fact, it gives you probably more consistency at the wing, and it makes your team better, which is going to push you deeper in the postseason. And it's going to give those young guys more experience, more time in the postseason, playing deeper into the playoffs, and getting even more meaningful series, more TV coverage, and all that stuff is good for young players. And that's the one thing that I think a lot of people overlook when it comes to tanking and, we're just going to try and accrue talent. Playing meaningful games matters, and adding Bojan Bogdanovic for Cleveland would go a long way in making this team a lot better. Now, for the Pistons perspective, this is why I'm a little shaky on if this gets done. The second round pick is kind of the sweetener in here, along with Isaac Okoro, a former top 10 overall pick out of Auburn. A lot of people really liked him for his work ethic and his defensive prowess. Well, offensively, it's a little shaky from time to time. I'm just not the biggest believer in Isaac Okoro. Last year, he shot the most wide open shots in the NBA. They gave him on average 9 feet of space from three. If anyone knows the NBA court, that means guys were almost standing in the lane while he was shooting 3-point shots. That's how little defenses cared about him jacking up triples. And it's not much better this year. Teams really don't care if Isaac Okoro has the ball. They're not scared of him. I know they got him labeled here as an athletic finisher. That's a nice way of putting it, that he can't shoot the ball. Now, Dylan Windler, he can shoot, and Cedi Osman, he's a pretty solid player in the NBA, honestly. If Detroit were to make a deal like this, again, this is probably a 3-team deal that would have to get done, where Cedi and Windler probably get sent somewhere else, kind of around that $11 million mark. It could bring back a nice player for Detroit if they wanted to send out some of their own second-round picks, or, maybe you get incentivized with a second-round pick and, maybe a bad contract from another team. And Detroit can take those in right now, right? We've seen Troy Weaver be very aggressive. He navigates for the future and then turns those future assets into current stuff. He did it with Jalen Duren, basically turning Jeremy Grant into Jalen Duren all within the span of a week. He's been very aggressive in the past. He does a very good job understanding what assets he has, what assets he needs to get other things done. So anytime he can get involved in trades, or 3-team trades specifically, I think he's going to be receptive to that idea. And Isaac Okoro is a player that I don't think you should sell your stock on. Again, he's, relatively young in his career. I believe he was one pick before Killian Hayes. talk about the fight earlier. Sorry, I just thought about that again. It's Killian Hayes. Last player in the NBA I would expect to throw a punch, but nonetheless, Isaac Okoro, maybe he's got a puncher's chance to turn his career around in Detroit, and hopefully he does. Killian Hayes, I've given him a lot of flack. He has played pretty well the last month of the season or so here, and maybe Okoro, a change of scenery could be really good for him. He is the type of player I think Detroit could need. Someone who is quite athletic and is pretty solid defensively. That's really what earned him his stripes at Auburn. And I think if you look at him here in Detroit, if he were to land there, maybe Dwayne Casey could get the most out of him, although I'm not super confident in the Dwayne Casey train. Let's get into the next one now. We look at a trade with the Brooklyn Nets, which is really fun because Bojan Bogdanovic is a former Net, just like he was a former Cleveland Cavalier. Bojan was not a former Cavalier. He's actually getting traded for a former Cavalier here in Joe Harris, someone who he started his career in Cleveland. His first season in the league, played 51 games for them, started 1. His next year played only 5. And then the Nets came in and gave him a big contract, which not a lot of people were expecting, but they gave him enough to get the deal done. Joe Harris obviously went to the Nets, and he's had some incredible years for them, although this is not one of them. He's shooting sub 40% from 3. Now, he's still around 38%, which is not bad by any means. But defensively, there's been some question marks, and, his health's deteriorated over the last year and a half or so. And I think it's definitely possible that the Brooklyn Nets do look to move on from Joe Harris at some point. And I think a deal like this does make some sense. They do get 2 years older here, moving from Joe Harris, who's only 31, to Bojan, who's 33. And it does cost them a first-round pick. But there's no denying here that Bojan Bogdanovic is significantly better at this point than Joe Harris. You see here, this Fanspo actually projects +4 wins for the Brooklyn Nets making this move, and they're one of the hottest teams in basketball right now. A lot of credit is owed to the Brooklyn Nets just with the way that they've been playing as of late. Since Kyrie Irving has come back from his little vacation, they've been really, really good at basketball. And when they're focused on basketball, they're nearly unbeatable. Kevin Durant is one of the 5 best players in the world still. Some of the stuff that he does on the basketball court is incredible and awe-inspiring. My uncle actually had the luxury of watching them in person the other day, and he was telling me, man, those two guys are legit. Talking about Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. If you haven't seen them in person, I really recommend it. They are must-watch basketball in real life. And adding a guy like Bojan next to them, who, first of all, he's under contract. So I think Brooklyn, the one question is stability. Well, you get a guy under contract who's good at basketball. That's a really good implant of stability, especially someone like Bojan Bogdanovic. Have we ever heard any, drama around Bojan in terms of, his teammates don't like him, or, questions about his work ethic? Not really, right? Bojan kind of just shows up and plays basketball, and he's good at it. And I think more Brooklyn Nets players like that could be really good for that team. Now, it does hurt to give up Joe Harris. It hurts to give up one of the picks you got in the James Harden-Ben Simmons swap. But Bojan could fit next to Simmons. He can fit next to Claxton. And he's someone who I think, again, despite, the questions about his defensive rating this year, part of that is he's just playing on a young team in Detroit that, right now Jaden Ivey has to take steps forward defensively. You guys know I'm a big Jaden Ivey fan. Pistons fans, I'm not trashing on him at all. I love Jaden Ivey. But when you're playing with young guards, you're probably not going to be the best defensive team in the league. There's just no denying that. And I think Bojan Bogdanovic, some of his defensive numbers this year, defensive analytics, kind of fall victim to that a little bit. So, this doesn't solve all of Brooklyn's issues. They still need to get more size in there. But it's not easy to do that. Upgrading in a meaningful way here from Harris to Bogdanovic, I think, is a pretty significant upgrade for them at this point of the season. Let's get into our next one now, and this one's for another shooter here, but it's a more desperate team to make a move. A lot of people are saying, hey, they're not going to give up a pick to get off of Duncan Robinson. The Miami Heat will give up a pick to get off of Robinson if it means they're getting Bojan Bogdanovic. Bojan is exactly what they need. Now, I know, Duncan Robinson, Bojan Bogdanovic, similar sizes. Bojan plays a lot more physically, though, than Duncan Robinson, which is some of the components that Miami's missing after losing PJ Tucker. I think the forward positions are a little questionable. Duncan Robinson is just not playing nearly as much as we're accustomed to seeing in the past, 3 years. Obviously, last year was kind of the first year of that, where after getting his contract, he just wasn't shooting the ball as well. And because of that, he kind of fell out of the rotation. Well, he's not really, re-earning minutes this year, if you catch my drift. So Miami getting Bojan Bogdanovic would not only, get rid of this Duncan Robinson issue that they seem to find themselves in. I think Duncan Robinson can still be a good NBA player. I really do. Everyone likes to cry and complain about his contract. I mean, $17 million for a guy who's like a career 42% three-point shooter is not that bad. It really isn't. I know there's expectations and, he just hasn't played as well in Miami. The guy can shoot the lights out, and I believe a change of scenery is best for Duncan Robinson right now. And for Miami, you're getting a really good upgrade for this team. Even Duncan Robinson at his best is not as good as Bojan Bogdanovic. Bogdanovic gives the Miami Heat a little bit more of a wrinkle in their half-court offense, where he's actually a really good post-up player. For anyone who watches Bojan Bogdanovic, I think that's one of the fun little wrinkles that, not a lot of casual fans know about, that Bojan's actually a really nice post-up player. He's got a really good drop step, which you typically don't see for an NBA wing getting utilized a ton. He's got that in his bag. He's also got a really nice turnaround over his left shoulder specifically. Bojan's a pretty good player just in general, and I think he would help Miami significantly. And for Detroit here, you're selling yourself on getting a first-round pick, a reclamation project here in Duncan Robinson, who I do think would fit around Jaden Ivey, kind of in that Sasha Stefanovic role we saw from Purdue a year ago when Jaden Ivey was kind of lighting up college basketball. Duncan Robinson can function off the ball like a Sasha Stefanovic, but he's actually got a little bit more wiggle in his game than I think people give him credit for. He's a little bit more competent handling the ball in drag screen scenarios. He's not going to be a main primary pick and roll ball handler. Everybody knows that. But I think he's not somebody who you don't want to ever dribble the basketball like he's Reggie Bullock. I think that there's a little bit of that in-between game for him, and I think that's valuable for a team, and I think he would actually give Detroit a little bit of life, even while moving off of Bogdanovic, who's been a really good offensive player for them. And while accumulating a first-round pick, this seems like fool's gold, in my opinion, for Detroit. And for Miami, it solves a problem that Eric Spoelstra seems to have with Duncan Robinson. I think part of this started with Duncan Robinson being streaky last year and just never, having the confidence to put him back into a significant role. I think it's a mistake. Eric Spoelstra is a great coach. Don't get me wrong. I don't think he's, done a terrible job by any means. He's gotten the most out of guys like Max Strus, Gabe Vincent. You just can't tell me that Duncan Robinson, though, can't fill the bucket up like those guys can anyway. And he's a little bit lengthier. I know he, plays smaller than he is. But I think Duncan Robinson's a pretty solid NBA player. And I think somebody who, if you just give him more minutes and trust him with the idea that he's going to knock down shots, he's going to do that. He's just too skilled of a shooter to miss, honestly. And it's also a fun little Michigan reunion as well here, going back to Detroit. So I like this a lot for the Pistons, honestly. And I think Miami, it works out well for them as well. The next one here now, this is one with the Phoenix Suns. This is the second most likely, in my opinion. Remember, the final one here is my favorite one of the video. But Bojan Bogdanovic going to Phoenix, I think, does make a ton of sense. We've seen Bojan Bogdanovic be really, really good around two, a little bit more ball-dominant guards. We saw that with Conley and Donovan Mitchell. And, Conley in Utah was not nearly as ball-dominant as he was in Memphis. And he wasn't a super ball-dominant player to begin with. But he did a lot of his work with the ball, right? Handling and pick and roll, getting downhill, that right-handed floater that he's famous for. And then when it comes to Donovan Mitchell, very ball dominant in a, very drastic way, I would say. For Phoenix, Chris Paul, Devin Booker kind of fit the bill with that. Now, those two guys are better. Chris Paul and Booker definitely are. That's why Phoenix has, reached higher heights than where Utah ever got back when Bojan was playing with them. But Bojan's a seamless fit here in Phoenix. And again, you can see some of the flaws with this website. They project that Phoenix gets worse here, losing Jay Crowder, who isn't even playing for them, right? There's no actual, evidence that they get worse. They're playing just fine without Jay Crowder. Jay Crowder gets moved here. Detroit probably could give him that starting spot he's looking for. And I think the one nice thing here with Detroit, first of all, you're getting that first round pick. You're getting Dario Saric on expiring. You don't even care about that. The one thing I really like here, I think, first of all, Detroit could say, hey, Jay Crowder, you want to stick around here? Because I think he's a really, really positive player to have in a locker room and on a team. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, whoa, he doesn't even want to go play for Phoenix when they asked him to move to the bench. How can you say he's a good, veteran leader for that team? Look at what he did in Memphis. You know, the same year that Andre Iguodala didn't want to play for them, Jay Crowder was on the court for the Grizzlies every single night. And he was really important for that team. Then he gets traded to Miami. Well, in the bubble, they make the finals. And then he gets traded to, or he signs, in free agency with Phoenix. The next year, they make the finals with a bunch of young players. I think Jay Crowder's a really good presence in a locker room and on the court. And I think that, you know, with this recent saga in Phoenix, which, again, I don't fully understand, and I think that Jay Crowder is making a mistake here. I'm not saying that he's in the right, but I'm just saying you can't just let one little instance, you know, whether he's right or wrong, in that moment, you can't let that dictate how you feel about him as a player, especially when we have a really long track record of his entire career being a positive player that impacts winning. We saw it in Dallas very early on. We saw it in Boston when he was with Isaiah Thomas and Avery Bradley. We did not see it in Cleveland. That Cleveland team was a disaster before they traded him in IT and everything got moved around. But we saw it again in Memphis. We saw it in Miami. We've seen it in Phoenix. He's a good winning player, and I think he would help some of those young guys. Plus, you're getting a first-round pick here. It's pretty much everything the Pistons could ask for in a deal, except this final one is a lot more fun, and I think it's actually somewhat likely. The Indiana Pacers keep on winning games. This team is actually good, and you know, there's no more, oh, are they going to trade Miles Turner? Nope, they're not. They're going to extend Miles Turner this season, and they can give him a raise this year as well to do it. The other thing that they can do is bring back an old friend here in Bojan Bogdanovic, someone who they hated losing in free agency. Well, guess what? He's already in town for 2 more years after this one, thanks to the extension he signed, and it's not even fully guaranteed toward the end of it. So, you know, they give themselves some maximum flexibility, and doing so, they have cap space. They don't even have to match money here. And for Detroit, this screams Troy Weaver. This is like the perfect Troy Weaver scenario. Not only do you get a first-round pick, of course, it's from Boston, probably not going to be that great of a pick, but it's a first-rounder nonetheless. You also get an additional second-round pick in there, and you get a former first-round pick in Goga Bitadze, who, in my honest opinion, I don't think he's that good of an NBA player. I don't think he ever will be. I think his game's a little outdated, and I think he's not skilled enough to be one of those outdated centers who can be ball dominant and, you know, do some of the right things. He's just not good enough. But we know Troy Weaver likes to see what former first-round picks are able to do. He, you know, took the shot on Marvin Bagley. He brings in Knox in free agency. He likes to sniff around former first-round guys. This is perfect Troy Weaver to a T. He looks at Goga Bitadze and says, okay, maybe this is a reclamation project. Let's see what we can get out of him toward the end of the season. Let's give him a role. And, you know, if we put the right stuff around him and we get the right, you know, system to work around him, we can probably make him not look like a non-NBA player. Plus, you get 2 draft assets. And I think the most important part here, since the Pacers are taking Bojan Bogdanovic into cap space, you do not have to match money. So this cap impact here, plus $14.7 million, becomes a trade exception. And you might be saying, okay, Utility Sports, why is that important? It gives Troy Weaver way more flexibility in the offseason, because if there's a player out there making around $14.7 million that he would like to acquire, he doesn't have to match money then either. He can use the trade exception and bring in that guy without having to send any salary out. And with all the second round picks he has, all the other first round picks he has, he's got a ton of potential in terms of making a move for a guy right around that $14 million mark. And if he really wanted to, he could split that trade exception up. He could get a $6 million player here, an $8 million player here, and look to add seriously solid rotation players into the team while still having cap space this offseason. I think this is a win-win move for Detroit and Indiana. Indiana gets significantly better. They don't have to send out any of their good players right now. They only give up Boston's first-round pick and a second-rounder that they're not super concerned about. They get a lot better. And for Detroit, you open up a ton of avenues to make some potential later moves, and this really fits what Troy Weaver's DNA is as a decision maker. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video. It's been a lot of fun to talk about Bojan Bogdanovic. Pistons fans, let me know which one of these 6 trades you prefer. Let me know in the comment section down below if you do think Bojan Bogdanovic does get traded. Important note here, I probably should have said this earlier in the video. the Pistons don't have to trade him, right? They could just hold on to him and say, hey, look, he's playing well. This is good for our young guys, having a nice player like him around. It helps them develop, gives them a good role player around them who I think is playing really well right now. Role player kind of seems a little harsh to say about Bojan Bogdanovic. Quality starter in terms of that type of role. So there's no real need to trade him, but if you can get pretty good assets and set yourself up for future moves, it does make sense to at least explore. Thanks again so much for watching, guys. Hope you did enjoy. If you did, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.